blackness from the one and see Wilderson evidence. 8.8 alienation. The middle passage separated black from the social context and changed their status to that of fundamental objects. The black body exists a priori. That's like because the middle passage separated it from its cultural roots. That takes out the Warner and Hudson because Hudson says that it is based on historically contingent facts, but those facts are irrevocable, cannot go back, which means that the ontological status is permanent. Viewpoint structural antagonism. Whiteness is defined in opposition to blackness. Coherence of white civil society is only possible through the maintenance of black coherence. White identity can only be formulated through the mapping of blackness as an ontological statifier means that the empirical warrants prove the structural antagonism argument. You can see that no material changes happen, then lapses, even if it is truly not truly metaphysical. Anti-blackness operates it as if it is ontological, as such to be politically analyzed in that way. Section 10. If Hall might call this not necessarily corresponding to the signifiers of racial blackness, slavery, but it's historical realisation of the logic of transnational political culture that such that it constitutes gender loss, the infrastructure, the elected, whether provides volition, the basic concept for political ontology, of political ontology is not a metaphysical notion. It is the explicit outcome of politics and thereby ability to historical challenge through collective struggle, but it is not simply a description of political status either, because it functions as if it were metaphysical property crossing the tongue to ray of the pre-modern, postmodern eras. The application of the law for racial slavery is passive, it's pervasive regardless of variance of or permutation and operation across the millennium. That means the implication that if I win the ontology arguments, that takes out all of his Curry and Clark arguments about the self-fulfilling prophecy and a material engagement key, because it proves that the Wilderson argument, the thesis of the Wilderson argument is true, and that engaging the institutions, the attempts to engage would only serve to reproduce anti-blackness by masking the structural antagonism, specifically off the Curry evidence. It just says that the alternative would do little, but the basic question of whether we can do much in the first place. The alternative says that this is the best way to affirm our own subjectivity in our own subjectivity when we stop asking for things like civil society to affirm it for us. The Clark evidence requires that you win Hudson's as well, because you say that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, but that presupposes that you are able to make the problem worse or better, which means that you would have to win that. You would have to win that material change. It's impossible. Your weighting argument is that you do not know what the alternative is, so you should err. You should err on solvency. First is that you have conceded Turner's case arguments in terminal defense. You should not err on solvency. But second is that the alternative is clear. All questions how we should first orient ourselves towards civil society. The questions of value is that we can and should make value judgment about change within civil society. The all refuses that politics of legibility by dismembering social value. Before we can evaluate whether the F is a good idea, we have to disconnect from the anti-black value systems. That's a prior question. Begs the question of why you are engaging certain institutions to achieve forms of social change, which is the link debate that I'll get to later. You say that the alternative doesn't solve. The alternative doesn't solve because the state still exists. That doesn't mean that you have to endorse the state. The alternative does not endorse the state. All the link arguments prove that this is exactly the opposite, meaning that this does not matter. It is not a question of the material impacts of the implementation of the alternative, because it is just a question of your ethical orientation towards the ballot. Another permutation, you say do the F in the mindset of the alternative first. I'll do the link work here. The first that you exercise the state as a mechanism for social change, though the Wilderson evidence indicates that this massive structural antagonism, the way that state operates in a way that is bad. Second is that you created a narrative of progress. If I win that progress is impossible for certain bodies, and that means that your blind, all of your framing arguments presuppose that sort of progress is impossible, which is also a link to the critique. Third is that you do not focus on the structural antagonism, which is anti-black, which is an independent diss out to the affirmative, because it means it fails to solve for the underlying cause of violence, which is independently sufficient to vote negative. Now you say double by no double. The alternative is strong enough to overcome the link. However, we still have to project civil society in every single instance, which would require voting negative, not on the critique. Now, also, you cannot do the F in the mindset of the alternative, because all the links prove that your mechanism for engaging in social change presupposes denies the nature of white civil society. Now, quickly go back to the F in the framing arguments. You extend Brian 12 and you say that the concrete alternative is necessary. Again, ontology comes first here, because if I win that material change is impossible, then it means that all of the justifications for concrete alternatives presuppose that they has any value to us. The negative says that what has value to us is affirming our own political subjectivity outside that space. We have to deconstruct the social values that the current white civil society places upon us, which is the best way to reject anti-blackness. You say you also extend the particularity argument. You only extended the tagline in the speech. The timer went off. You've also conceded that you've conceded that there is literally zero change, because slavery led to Jim Crow, which led to ghetto urbanization, led to mass incarceration. It means that the particularity claim is irrelevant, because all of white civil society is fundamentally irredeemable. If I win the ontology arguments, you have not provided it. You say that I have not contested the solvency of the F. I have contested the solvency of the F. You conceded the Koenig evidence, which is an independent terminal defense argument. It proves that there would be no actual medical decisions in the world of the F. Obviously, I did contest the solvency.
All right, 1 minute and 56 seconds. Right now. then the F, and then the K. All right. No, nothing. All right. Sorry. Ready? Extend the no link to the dis side. We don't defend the United States federal government. We all do it through the states governments. Then, on the case, first of all, you do not understand this argument. You go to the state for all your arguments are just about how there's no funding for discrimination, but no funding argument was never made. But first of all, our argument is very simple. It's that the status quo uses the GID, and that you need a GID diagnosis in order to be considered competent in order. That is how the mature mental doctrine works. The affirmative defense, a flipping of that presumption, even call for the app. It very explicitly delineates this. Your argument is how they need a GID diagnosis. That is in the status quo. You even asked me in CX, isn't that the status quo? And I even clarified that no, they are definitely different things. But even so, you've considered the argument that we have reaffirmed fluid concepts of identity because people are allowed. So even if it's better because we still recognize the humanitarian right to be able to exercise your identity however you want it to, which means that the app is definitely not benefit to the status quo, but also you've conceded that your framing argument should be a movement in the right direction about how the affirmative is better than the status quo. People are completely refusing the status quo, which means at least doing that would be better. Your argument is about this psychological signal. I think this argument is very poorly explained. There's already a psychological signal in the status quo that you cannot look however you want to, and that people literally kill themselves because they do not like the way they look, and that is not because of other people, but because trans people, it's not because of the way they think a man looks or a woman looks, but it's because they already are developing secondary sex characteristics that they know are not, because you have conceded you cannot feel mindset shift those things away, which would mean that, right, like your argument is that like those things already exist, like no matter how bad you want it to say, so like someone who identifies as a male might not want breasts, but also extend that it's a choice. Your argument was it's a psychological signal, but I think the fact that it's a choice is very sufficient here. Is the argument is that like some people in the status quo want change, we should give them change. That's better. We'll answer like you make answers to framing, but I think we can answer. We'll answer that on the K. Go to the K. Few arguments that you're conceding. The first one is that the state exists in the world of the alternative. No answer to that in the entirety of the 2 NR. I asked you in cross-ex, does the state exist in the world of the alternative? Because this is not generic Wilderson. It's not Evan Engel Wilderson. It's no. It's not we're going to burn it all down, but we're going to have some different way of looking at things. I know this might not be a great argument, but you've conceded the state is in the world of the alternative. That is terminal defense to all solvency because you still work within the state, but also you've conceded that permutation to the app via the alternative is going to be, well, you answered it, but first of all, extend that you do the app through the mindset of the alternative because that is sufficient because I asked you, does the state, can policies exist in the world of the alternative, and you said we don't take a stance on that. My argument is that yes, we can, because the way that here's the big thing also, you do not explain the alternative in the 2 NR, which means that you do not know what you are voting for. You should be very, very heavily leaning. Even if you think he's winning a link, there's no explanation about how the alternative resolves that at all, which means you should definitely default affirmative on this issue, but also you can extend the Hudson evidence, which is about anti-blackness, non-inherent or ontological response, historically extended, and has able to change that. What's the argument? Also, you make the argument how material change is never in a model that Hudson cites different examples of things like when slavery happened, how slavery was something that was really, really, really bad, and then afterwards we had things like slavery did not happen anymore. Yes, there were Jim Crow laws, but it was still not beneficial because yes, slaves were still imprisoned in times of slavery, which means that it was still marginally better than in times of slavery, which means it's better. But also, I think that the argument's about how you've also considered the argument that you cannot vote for an AFI if you don't know what it does. So here's the argument. Like, your alternative is very confusing and never explained. If you want to vote neg, you have to think the alternative is good. You've also conceded perm double bind that either the alternative resolves all the links to the AF or is so weak that it cannot resolve those links, which means at best you should vote on the permutation because it has a chance of solving states in the world of the world. Good round.
Support the child deal. I gotta go get me some. Alright, bring me some back. Bring me some chips and hummus. No. Yeah, bring it for me. Oh, right.